He was hands down the funniest kid I have ever known. He could turn any situation into a laughing matter. Quite frustrating as a parent when I'm trying to discipline and he would turn it into a laughing matter, which I guess was a win on his part, because I'm trying to either scold him or discipline, and we'd both be laughing at the end. But then I'm frustrated, like, no, I didn't get my point across. But I've never met a funnier kid. He could always turn something into a laughing matter, and he could always make somebody laugh. And just being in a room, his presence, he was 6'4", 180 pounds, so tall and skinny, and his presence was just, he would just light up a room. One of my favorite visions of him and memories of him is when he would walk in my front door. He had these loose curls on top of his head, and he would walk in my front door, close the door, and just stand there and go, "Sup?" And his hair would just flop. And I hope that vision never goes away. I can still see it to this day. I still miss him not walking in that door and doing that. And every one of his friends, the same thing. He could make them laugh. He was just such a jokester. A jokester is the best I could describe it. And I think in retrospect, I think he was covering up his internal battles with humor and with joking to not only cover it up, but to hopefully make himself feel better and not have to face the demons. He was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and not to mention all the stress that's thrown at kids these days and adults too, the stress and COVID in the mix of it. And nobody from the outside looking in would have known that kid was ever sad a day in his life. You would just have never known it. But he struggled. He struggled a lot, and ended up dealing with those mental health issues in a really poor way, and started, experimenting with substances. And it started with marijuana when he was in about his sophomore year of high school. And when marijuana no longer gave him that feeling of normalcy, he decided to start trying other substances and experimenting. And the major problem with that is he knew that he had addiction in the family. In his dad's side of the family, there was a history of drug abuse and addiction. And I had educated my kids at a really young age of what they could potentially be predisposed to. And so he knew those dangers. And I think, like most kids, they think they're invincible and it's not going to happen to them. They've got it under control. And I think he spiraled out of control so quickly, he didn't know what to do with that. But he was dealing with that and decided to purchase a pill off of Snapchat. And that one pill contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. He knew about fentanyl. We knew about fentanyl. I did not know how dangerous it was. I knew it was dangerous, but had no clue. And again, I think that feeling of being invincible was where he was. And he had anxiety through the roof and was just trying to get something to calm his anxiety. He bought what he thought was a Valium to calm his nerves. And that ended his life. Wasn't the first time, no. But it was one pill that killed him. So I need to go back to the day before because I want people to know that he didn't want this. This wasn't his desire. So the day before, we were texting back and forth, he and I were, and he asked me what I had planned for the next day. And I said, I don't have anything planned till dinner. What you want to do? And so we were back and forth on what to do. And we decided we were going to go down to Lady Bird Lake, which is right here at downtown Austin, and walk his dog Bailey and hit up some food trucks. And when I made that suggestion, he said, yeah, that sounds really fun. And then later that afternoon, I texted him and said, hey, bub, let me know what time you want to go down tomorrow. And I didn't hear anything back, which is not abnormal for a teenager, right? So I didn't think anything of it. And then a little bit later, shortly before I went to bed, I texted him and said, hello, question mark, question mark, question mark. The obligatory hello, still not abnormal. I figured I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and have a response from him. Woke up a couple times throughout the night and didn't have a response, and I wasn't thinking much. And then when I really woke up about 8 a.m, no response. My mama's gut was kicking in, and I knew something wasn't right. And but I still stuck my head in the sand. I wasn't taking any action on that. I just went about my business. I went out to the horse barn where my horse was and messed with him, just trying to ignore what my gut was telling me. And finally it got the better of me, and I'm like, I'm going up to his apartment. So I called his dad on the way up there and said, when's the last time you talked to Cameron? And he said it was Thursday. So I had the most recent conversations with him. And he met me up at his apartment. And we went and knocked on his door, both of us pretty much knowing we weren't going to get a response. And there wasn't a response. So we went to the apartment complex office, and they weren't open yet. So I'm like, I'm calling law enforcement. So I called Leander Police Department, and 2 wonderful officers came out. And it's not like the movies where they can just knock down the door and go check on somebody. Even when you have a frantic mother out there saying, get in there, get in there, get in there. And they're like, well, maybe he's not there. Maybe he passed out at a friend's house or crashed at a friend's house. And I saw his dog in the window. She kept coming to the window, the screen of it. And I'm like, he's in there. He never goes anywhere without that dog. And if he does, she's kenneled because she chews up everything, and he didn't want to pay for the damages. And he was still trying to appease me. And I knew that's what he was trying to do, just make me feel a little better. But so they can't get in without permission and without a key. So Cameron's roommate was already gone for the day to work. And so Cameron's dad went and got the key from him at work and came back and opened the door, let the police officers in, and they closed the door. And Dwayne and I, Cameron's dad, we didn't know what else to do but drop to our knees and start praying. And just praying what our gut was telling us was wrong, and that he's really not in there. And what seemed like an eternity later, that door opened. And you can't unsee the look on that officer's face when you know what he's about to tell you. I looked up, and he looked straight at me, and he didn't have to say a word. I knew. But he had to officially say it and said, I'm sorry, but he's gone. Obviously, hands down, the worst day of our lives. And I remember after the initial message of he's gone, I remember just this numb, feelingless feeling. It's the best way I can describe it. Just wait, this isn't reality. What's going on here? And my next thought went to, I've got to tell my son in person, my other son in person, who was 3 hours away at college. Like, he can't find out through social media. He can't find out through text. He can't find out from somebody else calling him. We have got to leave and get there. And so my brain went away from what was going on with Cameron and that he was really gone to laser focused on getting out of town and getting him told. And that was the second hardest part of that day, when we finally got there to tell him that his only brother was gone. I got his phone later that afternoon from my best friend who came to the scene with me. She stayed on scene while we left to go tell my other son, and then the officers gave her his personal effects, and she gave me his phone, and I was looking through the phone, and you could see some indications there. But then I had law enforcement call me and say, hey, can we get his phone from you? We want to dump it and do some investigation. Obviously, it's just, I'm grateful for that. So they came and got it. And I didn't know a lot about what was going on the phone. I'm not a Snapchat user, and I don't know how any of that works. I know obviously social media is not a good thing, but I began pretty early on realizing the urgency to get the word out on the dangers of fentanyl. And so I created a Change for Cam, which is my nonprofit organization. But I had another mom reach out to me, Stephanie Turner, who is now a really good friend of mine, but her son was struggling with substance abuse, and she saw Cam's story and wanted to meet with me. And as we were having our conversation when we met, we were putting two and two together. Her son was in rehab and had mentioned the guy who was selling pills. He posted from a funeral saying, "RIP, we lost a good one." And the very next post was a handful of pills for sale. And as she's saying that, I was like, when was that? And she said, March. We narrowed it down, and it was Cameron's funeral that he posted saying, "RIP, we lost a good one," with a handful of pills for sale on the next one. So that started us down the major investigative path of getting screenshots of his social media posts and sending them on to the detectives. And that got them on the path of even deeper looking into him and going, okay, yeah, this is some legit stuff. And he was posting stuff like, feds are on my ass, but I'm still making bank, and all the emojis that they use to say what they have and where they're going to be. And so unfortunately, 6 months after Cameron died, my friend Stephanie, her son Tucker, also died at the hands of that same dealer. We have not only the bond of losing our sons, but the bond of being, kind of tied to the same guy that took their lives. And it's a lose-lose situation. We could be mad. We could be spewing such horrible things towards him. He's a kid. He was 18 years old when he sold to Cameron. He's 19 now, but in federal prison. They did finally arrest him, but his life is over too. He's looking at 20 to life. And it's not like your stereotypical, you go to the bad part of town looking for somebody standing on the street corner selling drugs. These are peers selling to peers, kids selling to kids killing kids. And it's got to stop. It's got to stop. He has another one tied to him as well. And there were two other people who came forward saying they overdosed on pills that he sold them, and they were brought back by Narcan. So there's no telling how many others that we don't know about. That investigative mode, I think, until he was arrested, that stayed intact, and we kept, moving forward and fed what we knew to detectives. But I know so many families out there aren't that lucky, and have zero resolution and have no support from law enforcement, who just want to kind of write it off. And that's really sad. In relation to a Change for Cam, I give presentations. The sole purpose of creating that was to educate students, parents, and communities on the dangers of fentanyl. And so as word gets out and more deaths are happening and communities are being more aware of the dangers, I'm getting more requests for speaking engagements and presentations. And so that keeps me busy on that end of it. But personally, life going forward is forever changed. Our family gatherings always have a hole in them. I remember the very first family gathering we had with my parents and my sister, my brother, and all my nieces and nephews and grandkids and all that. I remember the first one without Cameron, and it was so painful. So painful. And it was that point where, it was about 5 months after he died, and I remember when those brief moments I would be laughing or having fun, and I would immediately stop myself because I felt guilty for being happy. That's lessened. I've been able to have, those happy moments without feeling guilty now. But, it's such a hard feeling. But But all future events and the realization of everything that he's missing out on is really a hard thing to process. Cameron's brother, Hayden, got married this last July, and he didn't have the joy of having his brother there to be his best man. And although that was an incredibly joyful, perfect day, it was still there that Cameron wasn't there. And what he's missing out on, he's never going to know his nieces and nephews, and they're never going to have that fun uncle, the funkle that they call him these days, I guess. And I remember, just dawned on me, Hayden wrote a letter to Cameron one time when he was struggling, and it was kind of an impact statement of, I want my kids to know their fun uncle. I want my future kids to know their fun Uncle Cam. And so the realization of that for Hayden, actually coming to fruition is really hard for him too. And they're only going to know him through stories. And that's just so sad. So sad. There's not a day goes by I don't wonder what he'd look like today. Never say not my child. Because there are so many people sticking their head in the sand or turning the other way or just denying that it could potentially be their kid, Now, my kid doesn't do drugs, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm sorry, but experimenting is nothing new. And most kids experiment. Doesn't mean they become a drug addict or have a substance abuse disorder, or that doesn't mean it's going to turn into that. But kids are at a party having fun, and you trust your friends handing them whatever, whether it's a pill or another substance. You're trusting that friend, not knowing it has a lethal dose of fentanyl in it, and your friend doesn't mean you any harm. And that innocence right there can take your life away. Kids need to learn from their mistakes, not die from them. But don't say not my child, and have that dialogue with them. It's not a one and done conversation. Continually have conversations with them about the dangers that are out there. Don't be in my seat where I am. It's a nightmare. There's nothing joyful about it. Even though I feel like I'm doing good and people tell me I'm doing good and saving lives, I'd rather have my kid here.